Hi, friends. My name is Rajan Goel. I'm a registered migration agent at Aussizz, Perth. We're going to talk about the nursing occupations today and the PR pathways associated with the nursing occupations. So, as we all know, nursing occupations are very popular occupations in Australia, especially during COVID and after COVID. Nursing occupations are getting invited from all over Australia, whether that be state-sponsored visas or independent visas or family-sponsored visas, any kind of visas. Nursing occupations have become very popular in Australia and are obviously in great demand as well. So we're going to talk about some of the nursing occupations, the skills assessment criteria, the criteria for the states, and obviously how to gather points and lodge an expression of interests. So there are various nursing occupations on Australia's skilled occupation lists, whether that list is medium and long-term list or short-term list or state occupation list. Nursing occupations are there. Almost all the nursing occupations are there on every list. So some of the nursing occupations are occupations such as registered nurse, NEC. There are specialized registered nurses as well, such as registered nurse mental health, registered nurse perioperative, and there's another nursing occupation which is enrolled nurse, and obviously there are midwives as well. So these are all the nursing occupations in Australia which are on Australia's skill list, whether that be on state list or medium and long term list or any other list. So the first thing that we all require to do in order to be able to call ourselves a nurse, a registered nurse or an enrolled nurse for migration purposes in Australia is that we have to get a skills assessment for the occupation nurse. Now, whether that be a registered nurse or an enrolled nurse. Now, there's a certain criteria that you have to fulfill before you can get the skills assessment for these occupations. The first and the foremost criteria is that you have to have a registration with a body called APRA. If you're not registered with a body called APRA, you won't be able to get the skills assessment, which is done by another body called NMAC. So first step is to get registration with this body called APRA. Now, APRA has a certain criteria for nurses to get registered. So there are different criteria for people who are Australian, who have Australian qualifications, or rather accredited Australian qualifications. And there's a different criteria, obviously, for people who've got overseas qualifications. So people who've got accredited Australian qualifications, like people, for example, for enrolled nurse, you have to study a diploma, a minimum of diploma, to get registered with APRA. At the same time, for registered nurses, whether that be registered nurse NEC or any other registered nurse, specialized registered nurse such as perioperative, mental health, you need to have studied a bachelor's or a master's degree as a minimum. Otherwise, you won't be able to register with APRA with your accredited Australian qualifications. So after you've gained the accredited Australian qualifications from Australia, all you need to do is get the required English proficiency, which is normally 7 each in IELTS or equivalent in PTE. And then with the accredited qualifications, you can get registered with APRA. For people who do not have accredited Australian qualifications or who've got overseas qualifications and were registered in the home countries, there are other criteria which they'll need to meet. So there are two criteria for such people, like especially for the people who've studied in the subcontinental countries and were registered back in the home countries as well. They can either come and study in Australia. Of course, they don't have to study if they were registered in their home countries and were already working as nurses there. They don't have to do the entire, like for example, if somebody was a registered nurse back in India, they don't have to do the entire bachelor's after coming to Australia. They can get credits on the basis of the overseas qualifications, and they only need to do just, let's say, 1 year of bachelor's, which is sometimes known as bachelor's conversion course here, and they can then get registration in APRA on that basis. So they don't have to study the entire bachelor's to be able to get registration with APRA. But for enrolled nurse, it is a requirement that you have to study a diploma here in Australia and only then you would be able to get a registration with AFRA. So for overseas nurses, as I said earlier, they don't have to study the full course. They can either do the 1-year bachelor conversion course. The 1-year bachelor is only because they get credits for the overseas qualifications, and the 3 years bachelor's, which is a normal nursing degree in Australia, gets reduced to 1 year. Or they can do masters and get registration with APRA. If they don't want to study in Australia and want to get registered with APRA, then there's other way as well. For registered nurses who are overseas qualified nurses, they can go through the outcomes-based assessment as well, in which they have to clear a multiple choice questions exam, which is called NCLEX with APRA. If APRA is obviously satisfied with your overseas qualifications, and it is largely equivalent to Australian qualifications, then obviously they can do this NCLEX, which is a MCQ, multiple choice questions exam. And once they clear that, they also have to clear a practical clinical exam for nurses, which is called AWST. I think it is only held in Adelaide at the moment in Australia. So once you clear that AWST, then you will meet the eligibility requirement. I mean, at least the educational part with APRA, and you can register yourself with APRA. Of course, you'll need the English proficiency still, which is 7 in IELTS or equivalent in PT. And once you get that, you will be able to register with APRA. So these are the steps to register with APRA, which is a must for you to be able to get a skills assessment for these occupations in Australia. Once you've registered yourself with APRA, you can actually go to ANMAC and then get a skills assessment, either as an enrolled nurse or a registered nurse or a midwife, depending on what sort of registration you have with APRA already. Now, ANMAC skills assessment does not require you to prove your English proficiency again. They only require registration with APRA. Of course, they'll check your qualifications again. If you want to get a skills assessment as a specialized nurse, like for example, if you want to get skills assessment as a registered nurse, mental health, then you must have 3 months of experience in that particular field for you to be able to get the skills assessment for that specialized occupation. Now that 3 months of experience could be either in Australia or overseas as well when you were registered back home and you were doing that, you had that work experience in that specialized field, then you would be able to get that specialized nursing occupation from ANMAC as well. And once you get the skills assessment for any registered nurse occupation, for example, enrolled nurse or registered nurse or midwife, then of course you would be able to lodge your expression of interest, because now you have this occupation for migration purposes in Australia. Now you would be able to, after that, you would be able to lodge an expression of interest for various states and independent visas for this particular occupation. Now, as you perhaps already know, there are various types of visas in Australia. Like I'm just talking about the points-based visas here. So we've got the state-sponsored visas such as subclass 190 and 491, under which you have to fulfill the state criteria. Every state has their own criteria. And one of the criteria being that your occupation must be on that particular state occupation list, which under which you are trying to get the nomination from. So let's say you want to apply an expression of interest for WA state for 190 or 491 visa. You must meet the WA criteria. And some states might have this criteria where you have to live in the state for at least 6 months before you become eligible. Some states might even require you to have studied there for some time before you could meet the criteria for any particular state. So make sure you meet that criteria before you lodge an expression of interest. Otherwise, there's no point lodging an expression of interest for any particular state if you don't meet the criteria of any of that state. There are the second category is obviously the independent category, which is the subclass 189. In this category, your occupation should be on the medium and long-term list, which is MLT SSL list. All the registered nurses are on this list. So you would be, if you've got a skills assessment for a registered nurse, you would be able to lodge an expression of interest, provided you meet the minimum eligibility point score of 65 points to be able to lodge an expression of interest. And we've seen in the past, even during COVID and even until today, people are getting invited even at very low points, like 65, 70 points, if their occupation is registered nurse. Now, enrolled nurse, for example, is not on the MLT SSL list, this occupation. So with this occupation, you would not be able to apply for the expression of interest for 189 visa. Similarly, there's another third category, which is the family-sponsored visas, which is subclass 491. Now, the requirement for this category is also that your occupation should be on the MLT SSL list, plus you should have a relative, and the relatives are defined like your uncle, your auntie, your first cousin, your brother, sister. If they're living in any, they're Australian citizens or PR and living in a regional part of Australia, then you might be eligible under this category. But your occupation under this category also has to be on the MLT SSL list, which is the medium and long-term list. So registered nurses, again, as I said, all the occupations are on the MLT SSL list. You would be eligible under this category as well if you've got a relative. But enrolled nurse, again, because it is not on the medium and long-term list and it is only on the short-term list, would not be eligible under this category. So if you're an enrolled nurse, under the points-based visas, you would only be eligible for state-nominated visas such as subclass 190 and subclass 491. And enrolled nurse is actually there on most of the state lists. So even if you have a skills assessment for an enrolled nurse, you've got a very good chance of getting the PR in Australia, as most of the states have this occupation on the list. Of course, with the registered nurse, your states are open, your independent visas are open, and your family-sponsored visas are open as well. So yeah, I've got a few questions here. So somebody's asking, chemist is good. Well, chemist is good. If you're living in NSW regional, chemist is one of the, so NSW also has target sectors for both 491 and 190. So if you've been living in NSW for, let's say, 6 months, you would be eligible for 190 as well. So I'm hoping that you would have lodged your expression of interest. And it is an occupation in the health sector, so it is a priority occupation for NSW. So if you've got good enough points, I would say still got a good chance of getting invited. For 491, I think NSW has 2 streams, although I'm based in WA. But NSW has 2 streams, and one is that you have to be employed with the employer for at least 12 months. Otherwise, the second pathway is pretty competitive. But if you are employed with an employer for the 12 months, I think you can straight away register and you will get invited pretty quickly as well. So chemist is a good occupation to have if you've already got the skills assessment for it, and you've lodged an expression of interest. There are high chances that you will get invited. So yes, so as I was telling you earlier, you need to study a diploma of nursing to become an enrolled nurse in Australia. But this occupation is not on the MLT. So if you're a student coming to Australia who studied a diploma of nursing, the only drawback with these studies is that you won't be eligible for a graduate visa after this diploma. So after you complete your diploma, you'll have to still continue on some other visa that you might be eligible for, which could perhaps only be the student visa, because you won't be eligible for the graduate visa, because for you to be eligible for a graduate visa after a diploma, you have to have an occupation which is on the MLT SSL list. But this occupation is not on the MLT. So just keep that in mind when you're studying diploma of nursing in Australia. There's no graduate visa after this, but at the same time, it is a very good occupation to have, and you get straight away registration with APRA, provided you have the English proficiency for an enrolled nurse, and then after that, you can obviously get the skills assessment as well. With the registered nurses, people who come here and do the bachelor's course, the conversion course, I mean, it is of 1 year duration. So you have to bear in mind that after 1 year of conversion course, you would not be eligible for a graduate visa normally, because you have to study for at least 2 years in Australia to become eligible for a graduate visa. So just bear that in mind. So if you do masters in nursing, for example, of course, after 2 years, that's of 2 years duration. And after that, you would be eligible for, these days, most of the masters of nursing are actually getting 5-year long graduate visa, because they are on the eligible qualifications list. So you will straight away get a 5-year 485 visa in most of the cases after you would have studied in masters. But if you're only doing a bachelor's conversion course of 1 year, then it is sort of tricky. You might have to extend your stay further, because obviously after you complete the studies, you have to apply to APRA. They take some time before they can register you. And then you have to apply to ANMAC. They take some time before they give you the skills assessment back. And before you before you get the skills assessment back, you won't be able to lodge your expression of interest. And after lodging your expression of interest also, it'll take some time before you can get invited, although it is a very popular occupation and people are getting invited very quickly. But at the same time, it could take a certain amount of time before you can get invited. So you have to prepare. Of course, you have to keep yourself legal in Australia, lawful in Australia. So just bear that in mind. If you're coming for a bachelor's 1-year conversion course, you have to continue your stay in Australia mostly on a student visa. You won't be eligible for, mostly in most of the cases, you won't be eligible for any other visa. I've got a question here on Facebook. They've got a qualification, BCA, I think Bachelor's of Computer Application, 6 years of software engineer experience. Well, it seems that you are not inside Australia. Well, because so BCA is a degree from the subcontinent normally. So if that is the case, it seems that what you've told me, you are eligible for the skills assessment in one of the ICT occupations, which could be software engineer or any other occupation that you've got the relevant experience in. Yes, so yeah, I'm in India. Yes, I thought that you might be in India. So you are eligible for a skills assessment. There are many states here. As I was talking earlier, there are various categories of visas in Australia, like state-sponsored, independent, and family-sponsored. There are many states who are now inviting applicants from offshore, especially and they would prefer people who've got certain amount of experience, and 6 years of experience will be considered favorably in your case. So I would suggest you, especially if you can get a good score in English, because that would considerably help you get good point score. And you can apply for state-sponsored expression of interests, and even the independent expression of interest, provided your occupation, the skills assessment that you like the occupation is on the MLT-SSL list. So yes, why not? You should apply for the skills assessment and apply for the expression of interest for various states in Australia. So coming back to registered nurses. So as I was telling, so after doing a Master of Nursing, people would be eligible for 5 years of graduate visa as well. So that is a long time to have for you to actually try for any of the state-sponsored visas or independent category visas. With the Diploma of Nursing, you can come here and study diploma leading to bachelor's, which would lead to, which you can complete your bachelor's later as well, which would give you the registration for registered nurse as well. And in the meantime, you will get the qualification of Diploma of Nursing, which will give you the skills assessment for enrolled nurse. And that in the meantime, while you're doing your bachelor's, you could try for your PR prospects as well. And you could very well get your PR while you're doing your bachelor's, and then you can complete your bachelor's as well, and then have a very good career in like nursing as well. Nursing is a well-paid career in Australia. So so it's a win-win situation where you get PR as well as good career in Australia, right? So just bear with me for 1 second. All right, friends. Well, this is it for nursing occupations and the PR pathways in Australia. I'll just reiterate, there are many nursing occupations on the Australia skilled list, and they're all good occupations to have. They are on every state list almost. They are on the independent lists, like MLT-SSL lists, and they are on the list of the family-sponsored visa categories as well. Of course, there are employer-sponsored pathways available for nursing occupations as well. So there are various employer-sponsored visas. For most of the employer-sponsored visas, you need to have a minimum of 2 years of experience. Now, this experience does not have to be Australian experience. If you worked overseas after your registration in Australia, then like let's say you worked in India for 2 years after you were registered in India, you can still use that experience to count towards your employer-sponsored visa category requirement. And if an employer is willing, and it's not very hard to find an employer who would be willing to sponsor you in these occupations as well. As I said earlier, these occupations are in great demand in Australia, and employers are looking to recruit nurses in Australia from all over. So it's a very good pathway for you uh, to sort of in the employer sponsored category as well. So after 2 years of experience, if you find an employer who's willing to sponsor you, you can straight away get sponsored as on a 482 visa, which is an employer's temporary employer sponsored visa. And after 2 years of working with the same employer, you can apply for 186, which is a permanent visa to Australia. So even if you do not meet the points criteria for whatever reason, you still have this pathway available, and which is not a very difficult pathway, as I said, because of the fact that nurses are in huge demand in Australia. You could move towards 482. And if you've got 3 years of experience already, like a full-time experience, you could, and if you find an employer who's willing to sponsor you for a permanent visa, which is subclass 186, you could very well get sponsored for a permanent visa straight away, and you'll be a PR. In that manner, you don't have to wait, lodge an expression of interest, and wait for the invitations to come through, and then do the visa process. So if you find an employer who's willing to sponsor you, you meet the relevant experience requirement, which is, and you're registered in Australia, like for example, 3 years experience, and you're registered in Australia, then you can straight away get sponsored for permanent residency by an employer in Australia. I've got a question here. I want to ask you one thing. I'm chef. I'm going to apply PSA Job Ready program in July 2021. I applied. He's already applied for the provisional skills assessment, and outcome came in October 2021. Advanced diploma student visa till March 2000. In March, applied for it 5 visa in March 2022, and job ready employment in when they start to count my hours for 186 direct entry visa. Oh, so 186, in the 186 category, your the employment experience has to be skilled experience, which essentially means that any experience which the ANSCO states is skilled experience. So ANSCO states that after the relevant bachelor's and after the registration, for example, I'm talking about registered nurse. So any experience only after your registration can be counted for 186 direct entry. In case of the occupation chef, now the skills assessing body, which is TRA, says that Cert 4 is the minimum requirement before you can actually start the job ready program. So so skills assessing body is a designated body which determines whether your experience is skilled or not. Now, ANSCO says that any experience after a diploma would be considered a skilled experience, but TRA still says that any experience after Cert 4 can be considered skilled experience. So we will go by what TRA says. And so any experience after you've completed your Cert 4, any experience you gain as a chef after you completed your Cert 4 can be counted for 186 direct entry. All right, I hope this answers your question. So any experience after Cert 4 in commercial cookery or kitchen management. Any courses for overseas nurses to be recognized as an RN? Yes, so there are many courses in Australia. As I said earlier, if you're registered overseas and have got overseas qualifications, you can come and do a bachelor's here. A 3-year bachelor can get reduced to a 1-year bachelor's, which is popularly called bachelor's conversion. And you can finish, once you do that 1-year course, you can possibly get registered with APRA and work as a registered nurse in Australia as well. So certainly, so lots of pathways. And of course, if you're registered back home, you can even don't have to study here at all. You can do the outcomes-based assessment, do the NCLEX, which is a multiple choice questions exam, can be done in your home country itself. And then for the clinical exam, which is AWST, you have to come to Australia. I believe it's only done in Australia at the moment. It's not done overseas. That's what I read last time I was on that page. Then you have to come to Australia, give the AWST, and once you clear the AWST, you could get registration with APRA, and you can get subsequent skills assessment from ANMEC as well. No experience letter is required for registration as such, but if you want to get registered in an occupation which is in a specialized field, for example, registered nurse, community services, or registered nurse peri-operative, then you will need to have a minimum of 3 months experience before you can get a skills assessment for that specialized occupation. Of course, if you want to claim points for the experience, then of course you have to have experience, 3 years of overseas experience, and then you can claim 5 points as well. And all the experience only after your registration can be counted at the required skill level, and the experience must be at the required skill level. So make sure your experience is at the required skill level before you claim points. All right, but experience is not mandatory as such for you to be able to get a skills assessment here in Australia. All right, so many pathways for nurses, whether that be enrolled nurse or registered nurse, both points-based visas, such as state-sponsored, independent, and family-sponsored, and we've got employer-sponsored visas as well, if you've got the relevant experience. And some of the areas in Australia under the employer-sponsored category are giving experience concessions as well, where, for example, if you need 3 years of experience, under the normal category, you might only require 2 years of experience, and if your employer is based in a certain area of Australia. So that is something that you can look out for as well. I've got a friend who got drink and drive by police. Any effect on PR? Well, drinking and driving is considered a pretty serious offense in Australia. So for any visa category in Australia, they must prove that they are of good character. Their entire criminal history will be looked at. So just this offense by itself might not prevent them from getting PR, but they've got other traffic offenses, and they have the habit of repeating the repeat offenses. And as I said, what the case officer will be looking at is whether they are of good character as well or not. So there are many factors which the case officers will consider to determine whether they are of good character or not. And of course, if you have a jail term beyond a certain amount, then obviously it is deemed that you are not of good character. So I guess you should see a registered professional, like come and see us one-on-one, so that we can discuss your case properly regarding that. All right, friends. So this is it for nursing occupations and the PR pathways in Australia. For any queries that you might have, you can obviously write on Facebook or email us or WhatsApp us. Or obviously you can book an appointment with any of the migration professionals here in Aussizz Perth or in any of the other Aussizz branches anytime you like. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your time. Bye.